My name is Tamara, and I just turned 22, barely holding back tears of pride and relief as I finally earned my MBA from the college where I spent the most intense, yet most vibrant and formative years of my young adult life. School was no walk in the park, sleepless nights, dozens of hours at the laptop, endless notes, projects, group assignments, exams. None of it would have been possible without my humble but treasured refuge, my grandmother's old apartment, where I had the good fortune to live for the last couple of years. Technically, of course, the apartment no longer belonged to my grandmother. After her death 3 years ago, my father inherited it, but to me, it was still her home, with its flowery curtains, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, the old chair by the window where she used to knit, and the photographs in worn frames that reminded me of family stories and the comfort that can't be bought or sold. My father let me stay there, and all I had to pay were the utility bills, which I managed, with some difficulty, by working part-time as a waitress at Luigi's, a cozy Italian restaurant just 2 blocks from my house, a small place with homemade pasta, polished tables, and an owner named Luigi who seemed to consider all his employees family. I won't say it was easy. Combining work and study was a real challenge. Especially on those evenings when, exhausted to the limit, I returned home with aching feet after endless shifts, barely taking off my shoes at the entrance, fell on the sofa and knew that ahead was not rest, but several more hours of studying for exams or writing reports. But I held on, because that's what adults do, that's what those who want something more do. That's why the graduation dinner at my parents' house seemed almost like a fairy tale to me, a long-awaited moment of peace and pride. Mom, as always, arranged a real culinary feast. The aromas of fried rosemary and freshly baked pastries hung in the air, the tablecloth on the table was cleanly ironed, and even the candles were burning. My younger sister Emily, then 17, was chirping around like a spring sparrow, joking and teasing me, like, who's going to have to help her with algebra now? And although she pretended to be offended, I knew she would miss me. Relatives gathered. Aunt Sarah, with her inevitable teardrop earrings, and Uncle Bob, who always brought with him a strange, tart cologne and stories from his youth, my cousins, Mike and Jenny, already adults, but still noisy as in childhood, and my maternal grandmother, whom I always considered the wisest woman in the world. They all congratulated me, hugged me, remembered their student years, some with a smile, some with obvious relief that they were behind them, laughter, wine, stories. Strawberry ice cream. The evening seemed carefree and warm, but everything changed as soon as the last guest left the door. The atmosphere became thicker, the air seemed to thicken, and in this silence, my mother cleared her throat. This short, dry cough of hers, a harbinger of unpleasant conversations, was familiar to me since childhood, and as soon as it sounded, my stomach immediately sank, as if my body itself remembered. Nothing good would follow this. Tamara, dear, she began with an unusual, almost official intonation, which in itself already alerted me. Now that you have finished your studies, we need to discuss the situation with the apartment. I remember how slowly, as if in slow motion, I put my cup of coffee on the saucer, trying not to tremble, but the porcelain still quietly clinked, and in this sound I suddenly heard the whole alarming essence of what was happening. The room seemed to freeze. Mom, with a soft but forced smile, continued, if I wanted to stay in the apartment, I would have to start paying rent. The words fell like a heavy stone into water, scattering an icy spray. For a second, I was speechless. Dad was sitting next to me, staring intently at his cup, as if it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. Emily was pretending to text on her phone, but I noticed her eyes flicker in my direction, a quick, furtive glance. I see, I said. Much quieter than I intended. My hand trembled involuntarily as I reached for a glass of water, and my throat felt dry, as if I had swallowed sand. Mom, meanwhile, moved on to explaining the terms, as she called it. The rent, she said, would be below market rate, a family discount, she said, even trying to smile, but the figure she voiced was still significant. I realized, something needs to change, urgently. I silently did a quick mental calculation. The salary from Luigi's would not cover this rent, not even close. I needed a permanent job, urgently. I understand, I finally squeezed out, because what else could I say? They weren't mean, they just thought it was time, and they were probably right. I'm not a student anymore, I'm an adult, and adults pay for their lives. But the moment was cruel. It seemed like I wasn't given even one evening to enjoy the fruits of my labor, to feel like a winner. already at night, lying on my bed in my grandmother's apartment, under her old knitted blanket, I scrolled through my phone, looking at vacancies in the area, hoping to find something close to Luigi's. Within walking distance, the restaurant, alas, could not offer me a full-time position. Luigi, although he threw up his hands in disappointment, explained, "It's not the right season." I needed something new, something stable, and I tried to focus on the practical details, salary, schedule, location, to keep myself from drowning in the bitterness that was still bubbling up inside. The next year passed in a blur, in the routine of payments, adjustments, in the endless swirl between responsibilities and attempts not to lose myself. I found a job at a small marketing firm nearby, nothing spectacular, of course. They hired me as a junior account coordinator. The salary was modest, but enough to cover the rent my parents had set, plus utilities, with a little left over for savings each month. That's what my budget looked like during those months when I was trying not only to survive, but to prove to myself that adult life, despite its endless bills and sudden turns, was entirely doable if you kept your head up and didn't allow yourself to panic. I faithfully transferred the rent money to my mother's account, always on time, even a little early, and almost every month I added something on top, a couple of $dozen. For water or electricity, which she never asked for and perhaps did not even notice, but it was important for me to do this. It was important to show that I can cope, that I am not a child, not a dependent, not a weak link, but an adult, a responsible person. Probably, deep down I was still trying to earn their approval, that same silent, unspoken, restrained "we are proud of you," which they rarely expressed in words. However, then I did not admit it to myself. It seemed to me that I was simply fulfilling my duty, doing what I should. Emily would come over from time to time, usually not to hang out but when she needed something, help with college applications, essay prompts, my old jackets and shoes, or just an excuse to rummage through my closet for something she called borrowed, which was really just something she could take and never return. She was a senior in high school, and I'd watched her change with sadness. The cheerful, outgoing girl we used to share late night snacks with under the covers was becoming more distant, reserved, with the slight arrogance of a teenager who thinks she knows more than anyone. Her visits seemed less like attempts to get closer and more like polite ways to get what she wanted from me: help, advice on boys, clothes. Emily had always been the youngest, and she was treated as such in her family. Her mom and dad couldn't say no to her. She was used to an easy life, to having everything she had without much effort, and I tried not to be angry. But sometimes something heavy rose up inside me when I remembered that no one had spared me at her age, that no one had spoiled me. She wasn't forced to work part-time like me, she wasn't taught to be independent. Around this time, she started dating Jason, a guy a year older than her, who worked part-time at an electronics store in a shopping center. The first time she brought him to my house, I tried to be polite, even friendly, but inside I felt a sinking feeling. There was something about him that immediately made me wary. I can't say for sure what it was. Maybe it was the way he talked about getting rich quick, the businesses he was about to launch, his hatred of his bosses, and plans for the future that sounded like teenage fantasies. Or maybe it was the way he carried himself, confident, even cocky, but with an expectation that everyone around him should be subservient to him, as if he was simply supposed to be taken care of. I didn't say anything then, I just made a mental note. And then came the phone call that changed everything. I was just about to cook dinner, something simple, with pasta and sauce, when I heard my mother's voice on the phone. It was tense, anxious, intense. "Tamara, you need to come over right now," she said, "it's important." I immediately assumed it was Emily. Of course, she was still torn between a few colleges, trying to decide between a state university and a city school, and I wondered if Mom wanted my advice, or if she needed help with a financial plan, or if they were finally willing to discuss scholarships. Emily wasn't stupid, her grades were good, not as good as mine, but good enough to get her into a decent school. How wrong I was. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the air in the living room was thick as fog, the tension hanging in every crease of the sofa, in every line on my father's face. Mom and Dad were sitting in their usual places, motionless, as if posing for a family portrait. Emily was leaning back in her chair, looking smug, her expression calm, even bored, and the only word I could think of was satisfied. Sit down, Dad said, his voice slow and muffled, like he was swallowing his words. He looked tired, older than I remembered, and it suddenly hurt me. I sat on the edge of the ottoman, my heart pounding so loudly it seemed like everyone in the room could hear it. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't college-related. "Emily's pregnant," Mom said, like she'd dropped a stone into the water. I sat there speechless, unable to process what she'd said. My little sister, an 18-year-old girl, was pregnant, by her boyfriend, who worked by the hour at an electronics store. I couldn't say anything. I just noticed Mom's hands clutching her knees, an old habit I remembered from when I was a kid. "We need to discuss something else," Mom said, straightening up and smoothing out the wrinkles in her skirt, as if she were preparing to make a formal announcement. "Emily and Jason are going to need a place to live. They're moving into your apartment." The world tilted, the room swayed. I had to grab the edge of the ottoman to keep my balance. "I'm sorry, you're going to have to move out," Mom said, and there was no guilt or hesitation in her voice, just a businesslike tone, as if she were simply making an announcement about the weather. "They need a place to raise a family. This is perfect. It's already furnished. It's a nice neighborhood. Jason's parents are nearby." I glanced at Emily. She was sitting there, grinning contentedly, examining her freshly painted nails. No awkwardness, no sign of regret. She was wearing my old sweater, and then I remembered I never saw that other one, the one she borrowed a month ago. "I'll find time to find a new place," I managed to say, feeling the pain pulsate in my temples, and my head was spinning from the very thought that now I would have to look for an apartment, draw up a contract, move things, and all this in parallel with a full work week, squeezed into an already tense schedule. My stomach twisted, not from hunger, not even from fear, but from the feeling that I was pulled out of the safe world, as if I was unanchored and thrown into the open sea without a compass. "A week should be enough," Mom said, as if discussing how long it would take to bake a pie. "Oh, and tomorrow," she added, with that special tone in her voice that was usually used when reminding someone to buy milk on the way home, as if she were about to say something insignificant. Some mundane clarification. "You'll still have to keep paying the rent." This time I really did laugh, sharply, nervously, loudly, so that the sound echoed off the walls, as if someone had turned on a radio in the room on a strange wavelength. The laughter escaped itself, ugly, harsh, almost painful, but when I saw their faces, absolutely serious, stubbornly calm, as if they really believed what they had just said, my laughter got stuck in my throat and became a lump, sitting heavily inside. "You can't be serious," I whispered, looking at them, searching for at least a hint of a joke, a bad prank, a smile, but Mom looked at me with pity, and Dad turned away. "Your sister and Jason, they're young," Mom began patiently, with the special condescension with which adults explain to a small child why they shouldn't lick the swing in the winter. "They don't have jobs yet, and with the baby on the way," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward Emily's belly, which, by the way, was still completely flat. No roundness, no trace of new life, only statements, only expectations, only the brazen confidence that everything would work out on its own. "So let me get this straight," I interrupted, my voice shaking, but no longer from tears, from rage, from incomprehension, from shock. "You want me to move out and continue paying rent on an apartment I don't live in, so that two perfectly capable people can live there, who made choices for which you now expect me to be responsible? I won't live for them, I won't pay for their mistakes. They're going to need our help," my father said quietly, meeting my gaze for the first time that evening, and there was something new in his eyes, weariness, resignation, maybe even guilt. "It's your responsibility as a big sister, family helps family." My responsibility? I stood up, my hands raised themselves, clenched in the air, and now I couldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "If they're old enough to have a child, then they're old enough to get a job and support themselves. Have any of them even tried to find a full-time job? Or have you all just decided that a big sister is some kind of extra wallet? How can you be so selfish?" Emily suddenly screamed, and her eyes instantly filled with tears, big, dramatic ones, like in a scene from a cheap TV series. I recognized those tears. I'd seen them when she was 12 and her mom had refused to buy her a new iPhone. I'd seen them when she was 14 and cried because she wasn't allowed to go to a party. The same tears, the same manipulation. "I'm going to be a mother," she continued, sobbing. "You don't care about your niece or nephew? You don't even have a heart. "You're so ungrateful," my mother said coldly, her face, which had been kind, suddenly becoming strange and stern. "After everything we've done for you." "Ungrateful?" I repeated, as if tasting the word. "I've been paying your rent for a year, I've been working since I went to college, and now you want me to support two adults who got themselves into this? I won't pay a cent for them. If you want to help them, go ahead, but not at my expense, and not on my shoulders." I don't remember how I got to the door. I don't think I closed my jacket behind me. Their cries of ungrateful, selfish, heartless followed me to the car. I slammed the door, and the sound of it, dull and heavy, gave me a strange sense of finality, as if something in my life had slammed shut once and for all, fundamentally, as if I had stepped into another reality. I didn't wait a week. That same night, I started packing. My fingers trembled as I folded sweaters, kitchenware, books, photographs. Tears streamed down my cheeks, dripping onto cardboard boxes, old letters, dusty shelves. These weren't just things, they were pieces of me, pieces of the life I was building. Luckily, I had savings. All those extra shifts at the restaurant, the night jobs, the refusal to buy new dresses, it all made sense now. I had been saving for a rainy day, not knowing what kind of storm it would be, and then it hit. I found a small studio apartment on the other side of town, tiny, a little rundown, with a tiny kitchen, a bathroom that was in serious need of work, and a window that looked out onto a noisy street. The commute to work was longer now, yes, but it was mine. The next day, I signed the lease and immediately began moving. As I packed, I wrote everything down. I made a detailed list: what belonged to whom, what I bought with my money, what was a gift, what was left over from my grandmother. I left the furniture my parents had left me. The couch from their basement was still there. I kept the dining room table that had once belonged to my grandmother, too, not because I didn't want it, but because I knew it belonged in the family. On the shelf was a bookshelf that my father had put together himself when I first moved in, but all the books that filled it were mine. The clothes in the closet and the kitchen utensils I had bought myself, every spoon, every glass, every bowl I had chosen in an effort to make this tiny corner a real home, were neatly arranged in boxes that I had signed with my name, not to prove anything, but simply to avoid confusion, to make it clear that all of this was mine, earned, not given, not inherited, not begged for. My coffee maker, the gift I had given myself after my first bonus at work, cost me sleepless nights and a successful project, but it was the one I started my mornings with. My laptop was bought after 3 months of talking to Luigi, who taught me how to deal with clients, how to save money, how not to let myself give in to fear, and now, 90 days and countless shifts later, I had made the first payment. My bed, bought in parts, first the frame, then, a few weeks later, the mattress, was a symbol of my journey. Nothing came at once. Everything was acquired step by step, choice by choice, dollar by dollar. All of this, the things that surrounded me in the apartment, which were not just furniture or appliances for me, but evidence of my independence, my strength, my efforts. I carefully packed all of this and prepared it for the move to my new, albeit modest, but my own space. It took me 2 days to move everything. I did it myself, box by box, carefully, methodically, as if I was carrying out of the apartment not just things, but memories, hopes, fears that now had to be left behind. My boss was understanding of my request for a day off. I did not explain the whole situation. I simply said that the move was urgent, and he nodded without asking unnecessary questions. It was such a rare form of kindness, silence, acceptance, trust. When it was all over, I drove past my parents' house, stopped at their front porch, pulled out the apartment key, the same one I'd been carrying on my keychain since college, the metal scuffed and scratched, and silently slid it under the door. No note, no sorry, no thank you. What could I say that hadn't already been said? Ground to dust in conversations where love was replaced by blame, support by demands. A week later, my phone exploded with notifications. My mom was calling. Her voice, when I finally answered, was shrill, filled with fury, bubbling like a kettle left on the stove too long. "What did you do to the apartment?" she screamed. "I made it clear the apartment was supposed to be empty." I sat on the edge of my new bed, the one I had built from 2 boxes and bought with my own money, and as calmly as I could, focusing on my breathing, I answered, "Everything that was in the apartment when I moved in is still there. I only took what was mine. I bought these things with my own money, money I earned working while I was in college. maybe Emily and Jason will try to do the same. What followed was a string of insults, screams, and put-downs that would have made a sailor blush. I never thought I would hear such words from my mother's lips. I hung up before the tirade was over. I just turned off the phone and sat in silence, for the first time in a long time. That night, sitting on the mattress in my new apartment, I allowed myself to cry, for the first time since this whole crazy whirlwind started. From "we need to talk about the apartment" to "you have to pay, but move out." I cried for the family I thought I had, for the sister who became a stranger, for the parents who chose to help her instead of supporting me. But most of all, I cried for myself, for that naive, conscientious girl who believed that if you did everything right, didn't complain, worked hard and were convenient, then you would be appreciated. It's amazing how quickly life can change in just a year. Just recently I was the hope of the family, an example for my younger sister, and now I was an outcast, excluded from their circle, erased without discussion. I dove headlong into my work, into every task, every project, with an intensity that surprised even me. Work became more than just a chore, it became a refuge, the one place where effort mattered, where you were noticed not because you were someone's child but because you were doing well. My boss, Sarah, noticed the change pretty quickly. She started giving me more responsibility. When a major client needed someone to handle a social media crisis at 2 a.m., I volunteered. When the office needed someone to come in on the weekend to prepare an urgent presentation, I was the first to say yes. I lived for work, and work reciprocated. Soon I was being trusted with independent projects. A promotion was quick in coming, a raise followed, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream. My tiny studio, which had once felt cramped, suddenly became a place of hope. I opened a savings account, a special one for a down payment on my own place, a real one, my own, where I wouldn't be at the mercy of my family, where no one could tell me to move out, where I would be the boss. Sometimes, out of curiosity or through random mentions on social media, I heard news about the family. Emily had given birth to a boy, my nephew, although I had never met him. There were photos online, a tiny face swaddled tightly in a blue blanket, chubby hands reaching for the camera as if he already knew how to pose, smiles, captured, filtered, and posted for the world to see. Emily and Jason were still engaged, playing house in the same apartment where I once wrote term papers. Until the wee hours of the morning, and my parents, they paid for everything. And then one day, out of nowhere, a letter from Emily showed up in my mailbox, a real letter, a paper letter, with a stamp and a postmark, as if she'd deliberately chosen the most nostalgic way to communicate to throw me off. My heart literally skipped a beat when I saw her name on the envelope, so familiar, so dear, and yet so foreign, as if it belonged to someone from my childhood, not the present. "Hi, sis," the letter began, and the words read as if there had been no pain, no betrayal, no year of silence between us, as if she hadn't been involved in pushing me out of the house, as if she hadn't sat there with that smug expression on her face when my mother said, "You're going to have to move out. I hope you're doing well. I heard you got a promotion. Congratulations." She continued, as if we had always been in touch, as if she had not been the reason for my forced independence, as if it was normal to congratulate the person you had betrayed without a word of apology. "I would really like you to come visit and meet your nephew. He is such a sweet little angel, and I know you would love him." Even that part seemed deliberately soft, seasoned with a saccharine that was out of place after you had taken away your sister's place. "Plus, I hear you're doing well financially right now." And then something inside me pinched, like a cold stream of water down my back. I just knew. If Emily was making a move, it meant she wanted something. I should have known. Emily always had a catch. The next letter arrived before I could even properly digest the first, electronic, cold, emotionless, a sign, a list, and not just any list, a wish list, a dream list, aspirational, like something ripped from a glossy parenting magazine. My credit card quietly sobbed. In my wallet, just looking at it, designer baby clothes that cost more than my first month's rent, a stroller that was close to the price of my laptop, premium toys, interactive, educational, noisy, that probably cost more than Jason made in a month at his part-time job, if he even had one. I sat there, staring at the screen, my lips pressed into a thin line, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Was this really her way of connecting? After everything that had happened, after a year of silence, just like that, no apology, no admission of guilt, just buy us this. I typed a short reply, skipping her entire list and asking the only question that mattered to me at the time, are you working yet? Her answer came almost immediately, as if she had been sitting at the screen, waiting. Oh, Mom and Dad take care of everything, they pay all the bills and give us an allowance, Jason, and I don't have to work right now, we're focused on being parents, it's such an important job, you know, I read, clenching my fists, then the real blow. Actually, we're thinking about having more kids soon, Mom and Dad are such losers, I mean, so great. They'll definitely keep helping us, especially if there are more babies, and yes, we want a big wedding, nothing cheap, those old fools will pay for everything. I reread the message 3 times, each time, a wave of disgust rose inside me that was hard to describe. My little sister, the one I once tucked in blankets, brought tea, and protected at school, had become someone I simply didn't recognize, someone who shamelessly called her parents old fools, enjoying their financial sacrifice, someone who planned to have more children, as if it were a way to get benefits without working, someone who happily lived off others, demanding more and more. I didn't answer, what could I say? Congratulations, you're a manipulator? How are things going in your professional career as a resource hunter? No, I simply closed my laptop, as if it were closing a part of my life, but Emily's words continued to echo in my head, those old fools will pay for everything, but, as often happens, fate decided that my retreat into silence was too easy a way out. A few months later, the phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Mom, I stared at the screen, for a long time, my heart sinking, and almost didn't answer. But something inside me, maybe a faint spark of hope, maybe curiosity, maybe the remnants of a daughter's debt, made me press accept. Tamara, she said, and I immediately knew something had changed. Her voice was different than before, tired, quiet, defeated. We need to talk, can you come? I didn't know why I agreed, perhaps I still harbored a foolish hope for reconciliation, or maybe I just wanted to see with my own eyes what had become of the people I once called family. That evening, I drove along familiar streets that now seemed alien to me. The buildings hadn't changed, but the feeling was different, as if I was visiting a place where I had previously lived only in dreams, and now I was returning as a guest, nothing more. When I entered the house, I saw right away, they had aged. Dad had more gray hair, his movements had become slow, as if each movement was difficult. New wrinkles had appeared on Mom's face, and there were shadows under her eyes, heavy, tired, as if from long nights without sleep. They sat in their usual place on the sofa, but they held themselves differently than before. There was no familiar confidence in their posture. Something in their poses spoke of defeat, of helplessness. We're taking on extra shifts, Dad said without preamble, his voice thick with exhaustion, as if each word were an effort, working overtime to help your sister and Jason. I said nothing, I just stood, listened, and in that silence, the clock on the wall ticked especially loudly, as if it wanted to fill the gaping chasm that now lay between me and them. We know you're good at your job, Mom said, and at that moment I felt my heart squeeze, as if someone had touched me roughly. Even though I was sitting in complete silence, I knew that tone, I knew it all too well. It was not a voice of reconciliation, not a hand extended across the chasm that had been widening between us for years. It was the preface to a new request, a new demand, a new shifting of responsibility. We think it's time you helped and supported your sister, she continued, and I couldn't help but laugh, not from joy, not from humor, but from pure, icy disbelief, from the ringing absurdity, from the fact that even now, after everything, they still didn't understand, didn't realize what exactly they had lost. You want me to, what? I asked, not believing my own ears. Your sister can't do a lot of things right now, Mom insisted, leaning forward, as if trying to impart her reasonableness to me closer. She has a child to take care of, it's a full-time job. What about Jason? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest, can't he help with the child, too? I looked at these people, my parents, the ones who had once taught me responsibility, who had instilled in me the virtue of hard work, the pride of independence, the ones who had insisted that I get good grades, work while I went to school, not ask for more than I need, not complain, and now they sat in front of me, making excuses for 2 adults who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves but had chosen not to. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, carefully, enunciating each word as if each one were a stone in the wall I was building between us. You work overtime to support my sister and her fiancé, both of whom are healthy, young, and perfectly capable of earning a living. They chose not to work, and now you expect me to join you in supporting their laziness? My father's face flushed, red with rage, just as it had when I was a child and he had yelled at me for breaking a vase. You are selfish and greedy if you do not help support your sister, he hissed. Consider yourself an outcast, she answered quietly, almost in a whisper, but every word cut like a knife. You cannot renounce someone who is no longer there. And so I walked out of their house for what I hoped would be forever. The door slammed behind me with a dull thud that sounded like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence that had lasted most of my adult life. When I got back to my apartment, it felt like a sanctuary, not just a place. I kicked off my shoes, made myself a strong black tea with honey, sat down at the computer, and my hands didn't shake, they were steady, solid, confident. I opened my email and found that same message from Emily from months ago, the one in which she'd openly bragged about manipulating our parents, calling them old fools, describing her plans to have more kids so she wouldn't have to work and get everything for free. I stared at it for a long moment, the cursor hovering over the forward button, and for a moment I thought I was betraying someone's trust, but then I remembered that Emily had betrayed our parents' trust long before. Without comment, without explanation, I clicked forward and entered Mom's address. Sometimes the truth, the harshest, the most naked, speaks louder than any explanation. Mom didn't answer, not a day later, not two, but less than a week later. My phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister, our family messenger, an unofficial news channel, always knowing what was going on before anyone else knew for themselves. You won't believe what happened. Her voice was full of vivid, barely contained excitement. I could almost picture her sitting in her kitchen, holding the phone to her ear, still in her nurse's uniform, tired but animated. What? I asked, already guessing. Your parents kicked Emily out of the apartment, she said, and I almost dropped my coffee cup. Apparently there was a big fight. Your mom found out Emily was bullying them behind their backs, using them. She told her and Jason to get out and she wouldn't give them another cent. I listened as Aunt Sarah described the explosive confrontation as if it were a scene from a favorite drama. Emily screaming, crying, using her entire repertoire of tricks, the same ones she'd been using since she was a kid. Jason stood by, helpless, like a deer in the headlights. Dad finally took a stand, she said, and gave them 3 days to leave, and Mom was eerily calm. She simply said, we've been led around long enough. After I hung up, I wasn't surprised when Emily's number popped up on my phone. I picked it up, knowing what I was going to hear. Tamara, her voice was full of tears. The same feigned ones I'd heard dozens of times. Can we stay at your place? Until we figure out what's next, please, we have nowhere else to go. No, I said firmly. The word came out quickly, coldly, and even I was surprised at how easy it was. You're just like Mom and Dad, she screamed, breaking down. You're all so selfish. We're family. Family doesn't exploit family, I said quietly, reservedly, and hung up before she could answer, before another stream of reproaches, accusations, or theatrical sobs could begin. At that moment, I didn't feel angry, or triumphant, or even bitter, only tired, like after a long journey, when you can't go on any further, but you don't want to look back. Later, I learned from our unofficial family grapevine, that same Aunt Sarah, the tireless bearer of news, that Emily, Jason, and their baby had moved in with his parents. According to her, Jason's mother was a strict, serious woman, with the kind of character that is easy to recognize even from a distance, a believer in tough love, discipline, and responsibility, a person who does not tolerate parasitism or manipulation, no matter what voice they are uttered in. According to Aunt Sarah, Emily was deeply unhappy. Life with her mother-in-law was far from what she had expected. She was forced to follow a strict schedule, help around the house, bear real, not ostentatious, responsibility for the child, wash, cook, clean, and, the worst thing for Emily, contribute to the general household as an equal adult. Emily spent her days in tears, complaining about the injustice, about how no one understood how hard it was for her, how everything was not as it should be. and how the whole world somehow did not live up to her expectations. The circle was complete. A few weeks ago was my birthday. I celebrated it at home, in my new apartment, which was no longer the tiny studio where I began my journey. Now it was a bright, cozy two-room apartment, bought with my own savings and a good credit history, a symbol of my independence, my growth, and my efforts. I invited a few friends over. We drank wine, ate homemade pasta, laughed, told stories. Nothing special, just an evening with people who didn't ask me to sacrifice, didn't label me, didn't dictate who I should be. And then, during dessert, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and in the hands of the courier was a package. On top was an envelope. The address on the back made my heart skip a beat. It was from my parents. Inside was a silver photo frame, elegant, laconic, but not pretentious. I recognized it immediately. It was the same frame that my mother and I had once seen in a store window when I was looking for a way to frame my diploma. I had commented that it was beautiful, but too expensive for my student budget, and we had simply passed by, and there it was, in my hands. The package also contained a postcard, just 9 words, written in my mother's handwriting, but signed by my father. "We're sorry, we miss you. When you're ready, we'll talk." No demands, no reproaches, no excuses, just words. Simple, but heavy. I put the frame on the coffee table and looked at it for a long time. My friends asked if everything was okay. I couldn't answer honestly, because how can you explain that a silver frame can feel like both an olive branch, a symbol of truce, and a dagger stuck into an old, almost healed wound? I didn't call my parents, but the frame is still there, on the table, and the card is pinned to the refrigerator. I see them every day, reminders of what I've lost, and of what, perhaps, can still be saved. I hear snippets of news about the family from relatives. Emily still lives with Jason's parents. They still complain about her attitude, her rebellion against simple demands. Jason's mother still insists that Emily cook and clean and look after the baby herself. Jason works at a local warehouse, and his mother does everything she can to keep him going. They have to contribute to expenses, to save, to understand that life is not a performance, but a process in which everyone has a role to play. Not to stand at the center of the stage and wait for applause. Part of me, the part that is stubborn and maybe still a little naive, hopes that this experience will help Emily grow up. That finally someone is teaching her what we should have learned at home, but didn't. That love is not about letting you do whatever you want, but about guiding, setting boundaries, holding yourself accountable. That being a family does not mean being a victim. That respect is something to be earned, not demanded just because you share the same blood. That responsibility is not a punishment, but maturity. I am doing well, my career is going well. I just got another promotion and now manage my own team. I work with people who value my loyalty, my professionalism, and my boundaries. I have friends who are easy and calm. I am learning to say no without guilt, learning to take care of myself not out of fear, but out of self-love. Sometimes, I admit, I miss my family, the way I thought it was. But I am beginning to understand that maybe it was never exactly like that. I just wanted to believe it. The silver frame is still on my table, the card is on the refrigerator. They are like beacons, reminders of what was, and maybe of what will be. Maybe one day, when the pain subsides, I will find the strength to forgive, not to forget, not to justify, but to forgive. When I can look at my parents and see them not as those who once chose the weakness of one daughter over the strength of another, but as people who, maybe, finally understand. But for now, I live my life. I am building a home, a real, internal one, where there is no room for guilt and claims, only honesty and peace. I am planning a vacation, my first real vacation since college. I am thinking about getting a dog. Small steps, simple joys. I am no longer living according to a script written by someone else. I am writing it myself.